Prince Harry has had his day in court and he's made it quite clear he doesn't think much of the government or the press. And that is what our audience would like to talk about here in the market town of King's Lynn. 8 of Norfolk's 9 MPs are Conservative and the county voted convincingly to leave the EU. But our audience here, as always, is a broad reflection of the overall electoral map of the country, and they are also asking about the COVID inquiry and why is it so hard to find an NHS dentist these days. Welcome to Question Time. Rowley, who's a minister in the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities. In winning the North East Derbyshire seat in 2017, he became the first Conservative MP there since 1935. From Labour, Jonathan Ashworth is Shadow Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, once an advisor to Gordon Brown when he was Chancellor and then Prime Minister. He became an MP for Leicester South in 2011. He shadowed the health brief for a long time throughout the pandemic and has been in his current role nearly 18 months. In a past life, Ayesha Hazarika was an advisor to the Labour Party, including to leader at the time, Ed Miliband, and she also dabbled in stand-up comedy, though she says she never confused the two. She's also co-written a book about Prime Minister's questions and now hosts Times Radio's weekend drive time shows and writes for the Eye and Evening Standard. And Lord Sumption sat on the Supreme Court, the UK's highest court, for 7 years before retiring in 2018. He then became an outspoken critic of the pandemic lockdowns. Before his long legal career, he was a speechwriter for one of the key influences behind Thatcherism, Sir Keith Joseph, and the 5th volume of his narrative history of the 100 Years' War is due out this summer. Good evening, welcome to our panel, welcome to our audience here in King's Lynn, great to see you, and of course welcome to you at home. As always, we're on social media and there is a podcast of Question Time after the programme. Remember to hit subscribe if you want to carry on listening. So, let's get going, shall we, with our first question, which is from Barry Colvin.
Are newspaper articles obtained by the use of constant surveillance and harassment of prominent people really in the public interest?
So, Barry, I assume you're asking us because we've seen Prince Harry in the court this week for a couple of days. He has brought a case against Mirror Group newspapers for illegally gathering information on him. That is his allegation. And he also talked about how he felt the public were interested in articles about him, but he questioned whether or not they were in the public interest. Ayesha, as the journalist on the panel, what do you have to say?
Well, I feel that this legal action from Prince Harry is a long time coming. He's somebody who's been very honest about the fact that he feels he's been brutalised by the press. And I have to say, I have quite a lot of sympathy for how he was treated, particularly as a very young boy. He was clearly haunted by what happened to his mother. And I think we sometimes forget with Prince Harry now, because he is this very divisive, he's quite a polarising character now. He was just a very young child when his mother died, and he was essentially sort of stalked by the press through his teenage years. And so I think it's done a huge amount of damage to him. I think it meant that he was not able to trust people. I think it reduced his chances of having relationships, friendships. And I think sometimes when we look at celebrities, and particularly people like Prince Harry, members of the royal family, we do sometimes forget that they are human beings as well, with feelings. And just because they're in the public eye, it doesn't mean that they just have to be commodified and brutalised the entire time.
So where do you draw the line, Ayesha? So, for example, one of the things Harry's complained about is the amount of coverage there was of his relationship with Chelsea Davy, a girlfriend of his. He said he found it almost impossible to have a relation in that situation. Do you think it shouldn't be mentioned at all in the papers? Do you think there should be a bit, but not too much? I mean, where do you think the line should be drawn? Because people are, like it or not, some people are interested.
People are interested. And look, we have a fantastic, on the whole, press in this country, and we need to have a free press and a robust press that holds power to account. But I think in order to do that, it's got to be a clean press, it's got to be a fair press, and it has to operate with some ethics as well. And I think the issue for Prince Harry, it's not just him as well. He's in quite a unique position to take on the press like this, because to take on the press, you have to not be running for power in this country. You've got to not be wanting to be a very famous person. He is a rich and famous person. He's got his status, that can't be taken away from him. So I think he's sort of doing this because he does want to try and have a conversation about press ethics as well. But a big question in all of this is, if there was no bad practice going on, why is it that so many newspaper groups have spent so much money settling these claims out of court? Ask yourself that question.
Lord Sumption.
Well, some intrusive press methods are quite clearly illegal. And the big payouts that Ayesha was talking about arose out of allegations of telephone hacking, which were pretty clearly established. The problem is that most intrusive journalism is not illegal, and it's hard to see how you could ever make it illegal. There would be impossible problems of definition as to how intrusive something has to be before it becomes a criminal offence. As far as I can see, and you have to be quite careful reading press reports of the Prince Harry case, because even the fullest and fairest press reports cannot really convey the atmosphere of what is going on in a courtroom. But from the outside, it looks as if the real complaint of Prince Harry is not so much about the methods used as about the sheer unpleasantness. And I agree with everything that Ayesha has said about that. The problem is you cannot have a law against people being unpleasant to famous targets. The only cure for this is a greater sense of responsibility among journalists. Many newspapers already respect certain limits, others don't. But I don't think that there's anything that it is realistic to do to change the law to catch this, so that people like Prince Harry are just going to have to put up with it.
So do you think he was ill-advised then? I mean, it must be a fairly intimidating thing to go to court over this.
I don't know how strong his evidence of actual hacking is, but unless he can prove that he was actually hacked, which is the one illegal thing, it's not illegal to be unpleasant to people, it is illegal to hack them. Unless he can prove that, he's not going to win.
OK. Man here in the front of the check shirt.
Yeah, I completely agree with Lord Sumption. There doesn't seem to be an awful lot of evidence. And if you look at the things that happen in America to him now, it doesn't seem to be any different over there. I think
so
Harry...
you don't have much sympathy for him?
No, not in the slightest, especially when Prince Harry seems to use the media to his benefit whenever he can. I don't think you can have it on both sides.
OK, man at the back.
Stalking should be illegal.
Surely...
Stalking someone should be illegal.
Well, Lord Sumption, you'd be a better place than anyone. What's stalking? Stalking is illegal. Following someone with a camera for a newspaper article just when they come out of a restaurant, I don't know, that wouldn't count as stalking.
There has to be an element of threat.
There has to be an element of threat,
Yep.
Right, OK.
But surely if it's chasing somebody where they can be in danger, then you know, that should be looked at.
Well, that probably would qualify. It depends on the facts.
OK. Lee?
Well, I think probably what Lord Sumption said is roughly where I am as well. There's obviously a clear place where illegality can happen, and if that's the case, you know, there are processes. People should be held to account for that. There's a court case at the moment which is going through to establish whether that's happened here, and if it has, the relevant parties should be held to account. And then
the question, Lee, is are newspaper articles obtained by use of constant surveillance? Not necessarily. You're not saying whether it's legal or illegal, but just constant surveillance. It could be legal. Is it really in the public interest? I mean, are you comfortable with the kind of stories that Prince Harry is talking about in this court case?
But how do you regulate constant surveillance? How do you work out what the definition of constant is? When does it become incrementally too much versus incrementally too little? And that's the problem. That's the things that we as politicians have to weigh up all the time. And to some extent, perhaps we're a bit inured as politicians, because even in a tiny way, we see a lot of stuff which isn't particularly pleasant. We get a lot of opprobrium and things like that. And I'm not asking for any sympathy in any way, but it does over time. You lose that perspective a little bit about it. But fundamentally, illegal behaviour should be stopped. Behaviour which isn't nice but isn't illegal, we have to realise that there are unintended consequences if we try to regulate that, and we should be very careful about thinking that through.
OK, let's hear a bit more from our audience. Yes, at the back there.
OK, it may not be in the public interest, but the public is obviously interested, because if the public wasn't interested, the journalists wouldn't follow Prince Harry to get these stories. So every time they get a story, it sells their papers and they get more and more stories, so they just keep at it. It's probably most of the audience here are not very interested in these stories, but en masse as a country, they're definitely interested, and they want to have these stories about tittle-tattle, about the inside of what's happening in people's bedrooms, who they're with, who they're sleeping with, and all the rest of it. They probably should have more reports about what's happening in Sudan and places like that, but these are the stories which sell these papers.
Okay. The woman here in the yellow.
I'm sorry, mine's slightly different position on that one, but we were talking about, you know, where that level is of stalking, and it sounds like actually quite often it's very subjective in that, you know, there was that story that came out with Prince Harry in, I think it was New York, where he was driving through and a royal correspondent reported that they felt chased and there was a huge amount of drama.
Or Prince Harry reported that.
Yeah, Prince Harry, yeah. Whereas it seemed like from the New York police, they said there hadn't been any report of that. So there's a level of subjectivism in there as well, which makes you wonder how much of it is true.
John?
Well, I have Prince Harry has clearly had a terrible, terrible time, and he's well within his rights to pursue these matters through the courts. I think, though, and I think it's important to point out that, as I understand it, and a bit like the gentleman at the back, I haven't perhaps followed the ins and outs of this as closely as some of the people who buy the newspapers, perhaps. But as I understand it, a lot of the issues which are being examined in the courts are practices which went on in the tabloid press, illegal practices, which we're told and we're hopeful that the tabloids have moved on from since the Leveson inquiry, which was set up about, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago now. I do think, however, that there has to be, as Ayesha says, and others have also suggested, a free, robust press in this country, holding the powerful to account. Look, I had a huge amount of human sympathy for my opposite number, Matt Hancock, on a human level.
But at which point? When he was caught
but he was exposed. But he was exposed on a human level.
You're talking about
for the human downfall.
With Gina Colodanto in the office.
The human downfall, you know, because I'm a human being and I'm a decent guy, right? But he was exposed for breaking the rules, and that's important that the press exposes that. So is that too intrusive? Is that acceptable? I think when a government minister who is responsible for very draconian rules is caught breaking them, it's right that that is exposed. Not even though it's obviously personally very difficult for the individual, and you can feel a personal sadness. I mean, because us politicians, even though we shadow one another, you get to know somebody quite well, and obviously. It was very difficult for him, but it was right for the press to expose that.
But also, I think one thing that's really important here as well is there's looking at the specific legality and whether any more press regulation will come in. I highly think that's unlikely because in a post-Leveson world, the press has its own self-regulation, which did disband and it regrouped, and I think things have got slightly better since the Leveson inquiry. But sometimes this is not all about the rich and the famous and how the press interact with them. Sometimes ordinary people get caught up and they get thrown into the public eye, often actually when a great tragedy has happened to them, when somebody close to them has died or they've been murdered. And sometimes the level of press intrusion that is put upon them is not something. They haven't got PR advisors, they haven't got a legal team.
But how do you stop that, Ayesha?
Well, that's why these kind of incidents, I do think, will make the press reflect a bit. After the Leveson inquiry, and that was precipitated, not because of somebody rich and famous, it was the phone of Millie Dowler, a murdered schoolgirl whose phone got hacked. That's what precipitated the Leveson inquiry, which was a cross-party initiative. The press did take time. Now, I know some people were very angry about that, but the press did take time to pause and reflect on how it conducted itself. And it's probably right that self-regulation is the best way. I don't think we do want politicians regulating the press in any way. I think that's kind of a really hard line that we shouldn't have in British democracy. But this isn't just about Prince Harry, the rich and famous, whatever you think about Prince Harry, whatever. This is also about how ordinary people get treated by the press as well.
Let me take a couple more points from the audience and move on. Yes, woman here.
I think it's very important to have freedom of press. We're known for it in this country, but I think the other thing is that it should come with integrity, and it's a level of how you manage that integrity and how each one of the publications manage that integrity as well. So I think that's really important.
OK, yes, the man there in the white shirt.
Just briefly, I think there's a contradiction on Prince Harry's behalf, though, as he seemed when he went on the Netflix show to say some questionable things, and I think he lost a few brownie points from a lot of members of the public. He seems to want to be in the public eye, and he made the decision to step away from the royal family. It seems that he's happy to be more of a celebrity now, and unfortunately, if you want to step into the public eye on other subjects, then I think you at the end of the day, you're setting yourself up. If you're in the public eye and you're a celebrity, you're going to have positive things said about you, and you're going to have negative things said about you. And I think, unfortunately, if he's like I said, if he went on the Netflix show, you're opening yourself up to this. So he's a big public figure now for different reasons than before. And unfortunately, sometimes the world's not a nice place. And like you said, things are going to be said about him. You're not going to not go and well.
So you can't pick and choose, that's what you're saying?
Yeah, I don't think you can, no, not at all.
The positive and the negative press?
No, I think he has to accept that if that happens.
All right, I'm going to move on, because I'm going to try and get through quite a few questions. Before I do, I just want to tell you about a special question time that is coming up on Thursday, the 22nd of June, because that is the eve of the 7th anniversary of the people's decision to leave the European Union. And we are devoting that programme to a conversation with an audience of people who took that decision, and that is Leave voters. So 7 years on, how does a cross-section of people who voted Leave feel about Brexit? Some may have changed their minds, some may still back their original decision, some may be somewhere in between. We're going to be in Clacton-on-Sea, on the Essex coast. We'll have the regular question time panel as usual. So if you voted for Brexit, you live in Clacton or the wider Essex area, we would love to hear from you. Go to the Question Time website in the usual way. You can comply to be on the programme. So that's in 2 weeks' time, on Thursday, June the 22nd, our special Brexit Question Time. OK, let's take another question now. Not about Brexit, from Ray Crane.
Yeah. What commitments does the Conservative government have to make over the next 12 months to remain in power beyond 2024?
Now, Ray, I'm going to come to you, Lee, obviously. The Conservatives have made 5 pledges, 5 commitments, and Rishi Sunak talks about them quite often. Just out of interest, do you know what they are?
Some of them. The one I'm most interested in is the commitment on inflation.
OK. But I'm just wondering, do you know the 5? Just
no,
because...
No, okay. I can't repeat the 5.
OK. Lee? Can you repeat them?
So, yeah, we can talk about inflation, growing economy, waiting times down, stop the votes, etc., etc. So
no, etc., etc. What is it? Just let's go through them again.
Inflation, waiting times down, stop the boats, and get immigration down, and grow the economy.
Well done. You got there in the end, Lee.
I think the key thing is we've been through a very difficult time over the past 3 years, and there have been some really serious mistakes that have been made by the Conservative Party. And I think it is important that when mistakes are made, ideally those mistakes wouldn't be made in the first place, but when they are, it's important that the party fronts up and says that mistakes have been made.
So which ones would you like to front up about this evening?
There's been over the course of the last year or so, some of the choices by the leadership at the time were the wrong ones. And so what we now have to do as a party...
What are you talking about? Go on.
From last year, in terms of July, and then Liz Truss, and the like. And I understand why some of those were made, but... There were mistakes that were made, and what we now have to do as a party is demonstrate to you, not just say to you, but demonstrate to you that all of those things and all of those challenges which have come through by COVID, most reasonable people recognise the world changed from 2019 or 2012. There's been a whole heap of new things which have come, and we've got to work through those, make them better, improve them, get on top of things. It's going to take time. Inflation is a global thing, for example, and we're starting to see, hopefully, it come down. But what the Conservative Party has got to do now is do things, which is entirely the point of the Prime Minister's priorities, and show you over the next 12 months that we are serious about making sure that this country is as great as it can be.
What do you make of that response, since you're asking the question?
I've heard it before. I mean, we've heard it all about the NHS, waiting times, and they never seem to materialise. They never seem to come to anything. So, I am a Conservative person for the last nearly 50 years, but I think they're not going to get in on the next election.
Do you think you'll be voting Conservative next election?
I will, because I think they're the least worst option. But that's the only reason why I'll be voting for.
Gosh, that is damning with faint praise.
I mean, I hope over the next 12 months we can change your view that it's not just you're voting for us because you feel like we're the least worst option, but actually because you think that we have the vision to do things in the 2020s. And I hope you can see over the past 12, 13 years, which have been a very difficult 12, 13 years at times, we've had to get on top of a really challenging economic circumstances after the global financial crisis, and then a series of these big events that nobody expected, Ukraine, inflation, COVID, you know, existential stuff that happened. And so what the party's got to do is demonstrate the successes. You know, we've just gone up in all the league tables in terms of education, in terms of pupils coming out of schools. We should be proud of that. Okay. We should demonstrate all the things we've done, but try harder to win your trust back.
So, Jonathan, I think it's only fair to put Lee on the spot. Obviously, this is a question about the Conservatives, and we'll come to that. But since Labour's made 5 pledges as well, do you know what they are?
Yes, I do. We want to have the highest growth in the G7. We want to fix our NHS, make it fit for the future. We want to deal with the criminal justice systems and make our streets safer. We want transition to green energy to create thousands of jobs across the country, and we want to extend educational opportunity for all. And that contrasts with Rishi Sunak, where prices are up, waiting lists are up, and the boats are still coming.
Did you know those off the top of your head? Or were you frankly scribbling them down while Lee was talking?
No, I knew them off the top of my head. And all of our key missions speak to the way in which we need to rebuild this country. Because nothing works in this country after 13 years. We just had the latest NHS waiting list out today. 7.5 million people on a waiting list. You know, it's the highest it's been. When Rishi Sunak a few months ago said we're going to bring waiting lists down, they've actually gone up by another 250,000 or so. I mean, how many of you have tried to get a GP appointment on a Monday morning when you're ringing up? You know, we've got schools around the country with their ceilings collapsing or the pupils being moved out of the school into community centres and sports halls because the ceiling might collapse. And then, of course, we've got what's been happening in the economy because of the decisions that were taken last autumn when we had this borrowing binge, which led to turmoil on the money markets, a run on pension funds, people's pensions being put at risk, and now mortgages going up for everybody by hundreds of pounds, if not thousands of pounds. This is what has happened. This is the situation we are in after 13 long, hard years of the Conservatives. And I think, Lee, the people have had enough of the Conservatives.
All right, well, let's hear from the people. I'll let you come back in, but let's hear a bit from our audience. Right, the man there with the hat and the red handkerchief.
We've heard it all before from both of you, from both parties. You're absolutely incompetent, the whole parish and lot of you. And those that are not incompetent are corrupt. I have no idea why any of us bothered to vote for any of you. You couldn't run a Welch store, let alone the country, either of you. And all you can do is bat off each other and not make any sense whatsoever. Stay behind afterwards, spoof off you. Have a word with me. I'll give you some home truths.
Don't worry.
That you need to deal with.
You're on.
I'm sick to death of you lot. All of them. The only person who went into Parliament with good intentions is Guy Fawkes.
I'll go.
Murderous intentions, obviously.
Well, I'll speak to you afterwards.
OK.
Fantastic.
We can have a pint and then you can tell me.
Absolutely. We'll chat. We will chat after the programme.
Right.
We'll talk more.
He'll pay.
Right. the woman here in the orange. I can't wait to hear what you've got to say, given what's happening so far.
Well, not quite as strident as that, but I was going to say, I mean, the Conservative Party have had 12, 13 years to prove to the country that they can provide strong, stable government, leave us in a better place than they found us. They've got 12 months, not 12 years, to turn that around. It's going to have to be an amazing 12 months to undo the damage that they've done to the country.
OK. And the man right at the back in the sweater.
I don't like how the Conservative politician used global events as excuses, like COVID, the Ukraine war, the cost of living crisis. Do you not think it's not a problem with the world, but a problem with you in power?
Yes. Come on.
Do you know what I think politicians should do? Is I think they should be honest with people, and I'm going to be honest with you that global events are affecting a lot of the things that are happening in this country, and they're affecting similarly a lot of other countries as well. I can't stop inflation at the borders. Neither can any government, whether it's red, yellow or blue. What we can do is to try to take measures to improve it and to reduce it over time. You know, interest rates have been historically low for many years. That's great. It's allowed lots of people to get on the housing market. But the interest rates are going up around the world. You know, inflation is happening around the world, and what governments have to do...
But ours is particularly bad and particularly sticky compared
and it's starting to come down. And we also are having some growth rates which are higher than other parts of Europe. But people don't want this relativity. I absolutely recognise that there are challenges, that the Conservative Party is in government, it has a responsibility to try and deliver on that. That's why the Prime Minister has been so clear that he's got these priorities which he's trying to make progress on. But we have to be clear, and I have to push back on the point about how, you know, we have every single lever. There are global things that happen. We have to deal with them, and the job of a government is to try and resolve them, mitigate them, improve them. But we can't wish them away. And any party that tells you they can is not telling you the truth.
Lord Sumption.
I think one of the problems here is that the public at large have unrealistically high expectations of what the state can do for them. And that applies whichever party is in power. Now, I don't criticise them for that. One of the problems is that politicians are reluctant to pretend that they are impotent, although in many areas, particularly in the economic field, politicians actually there's a very limited amount that they can do. They can nudge things in a desired direction, but they cannot transform the economy of this country, and the same applies to other countries. Now, I don't criticise the public for that, because politicians claim to be able to work miracles, the public cannot be blamed for taking them at their word.
So,
But
Lord Sumption, when you've got Labour
this.
saying that they want to have the highest sustained growth in the G7, you've got the Conservatives saying we want to halve inflation, you think that's just
I think that
for the birds?
Well, some of it is for the birds, some of it is not. But I think that the two examples that we've just had are classic examples of the way in which it is too easy to say, yes, we will improve the growth rate, problem which governments of both complexions have struggled with in vain for 20 or 30 years. Honesty in politics actually requires politicians from time to time to admit the limits of what can realistically be achieved politically.
Ayesha.
Well, I think there's some truth in what Lord Sumption says, that, you know, governments can't control everything, but they can do a lot as well. And to govern is to choose, and to govern is to make big decisions that do have long-term consequences on the country. And I would say if we look back, being really honest from 2010 onwards, Lee is right that there are some external factors that have contributed to the situation that we're in. But if we look at some of the really deep structural problems that our country faces, we've had 10 years, well, over 10 years, of really heavy cuts to things like our policing, which is why people can't come round when your house gets burgled. We've had huge cuts to the lack of funding in the NHS, which means we can't get to see GPs. You know, today there's terrible figures out saying that, you know, a lack of staff in the NHS means that cancer sufferers are now waiting a long, long time to get treatment. So there are political choices. We also have to be honest as well about where we are now, and this is why it's going to be very, very difficult, I think, for the Conservatives to turn things around. Not impossible, but very, very difficult. The country feels like it's in decline at the moment. You know, I speak to people all over the country. The country feels broken for a lot of people. It feels fundamental. All the things we took for granted a while ago, it's like an endurance test. Just trying to get your driving licence or something like that, or getting on a train is just an endurance test these days. We also have to be honest about some of the big political decisions we've taken as a country, which hasn't helped. Brexit, I'm afraid, has made this country into a much more difficult place to live in as well. And I think the point that Lord Sumption makes about being honest in government, you do have to be honest with people. And I think an incoming Labour government will have to be honest about the difficult situation it will inherit. There isn't going to be loads of money to splash around. If we want better services, the Labour Party may have to say to you, you as citizens, you might have to pay a bit more for some. We will spend the money well. That's your choice if you trust that. But we also have to think about, have we had good governance, stable governance in this country? This time last year, we had Boris. We've had 3 prime ministers in just the last 12 months. Not only have we had a revolving door of ministers who never get their feet under the table. Look at, for example, our housing crisis this country faces. We've had 21 housing ministers in a very short period of time. That's not good governance. And I'm sorry, we've got to be honest.
You're sitting next to one, obviously.
Well, we had a chat about this earlier. I mean, you were only housing minister for 4 weeks. I'm sure you did a very good job in that time, but that's a very short amount of time. And we also have to look at how we're being governed. Many of us in here tonight, watching from home, are going to feel sick at the fact that they don't feel that a lot of people in power are governing for you. They feel that they're governing for themselves. There's a lot of corruption, there's a lot of cronyism, there's a lot of doing stuff for their needs.
OK. Let me just... There's a lot of hands up. I'm going to move on. Let me just come back to the gentleman here in the hat and everything. You said effectively a plague on all their houses.
Yes, basically.
Can I just, and I'm looking forward to reports of this drink after the programme, I must say. How are you going to vote in the next election?
Well, do you know, Fiona, the last local elections, for the first time in my life, I didn't vote. And that's how I feel at the moment about the general election.
Right.
Because they are so inefficient. I mean, the last Labour government, Chancellor or whoever it was, said, sorry, the money's run out, when the Conservatives took over.
OK.
Thought that was humorous. Well, it isn't humorous for the ordinary person on the street. It isn't humorous for small businessmen. You need to wake up and smell the coffee. We're the least productive company. Productivity is less in this country than any other of the main economic G, whatever number it is. And
OK.
That's down. Sorry, Fiona.
And that's that's because we're not productive, we're not growing, and because we're not productive, we're not able to get a grip and tame inflation. And on this point about inflation is that we are doing worse on inflation because we've not invested in our energy infrastructure. We cut gas storage. It meant that when these international things hit us, we were so exposed, and that's because of decisions taken under 30 years.
Well, I will let you all, the three of you, discuss this in a very interesting, convivial and no doubt lively bevy after the programme.
We'll live stream it.
Well, yeah. Oh, yes, please, that would be good. OK, let's take another question now from Joe Hurd.
With the current cost of living crisis combined with a lack of NHS dentists, when is the government going to intervene to ensure quality dental care for all?
So I was, because we chose your question, a number of you have asked about this, and I was just looking at the stats. So 9 out of 10 NHS dental practices in the UK are not accepting new adult patients for treatment. That's BBC research that has done that. 8 out of 10 are not taking on children. That's from the same research. Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, there is a particular problem with dentistry, and it's been there for some years. There's some issues around the way in which the dentistry contract works, which is slightly different to the way in which the GP contract works.
And this was in under Tony Blair.
Yes, it's the way it was. There was a contract signed in the late 2000s, around
2006. It was
2006, well, mid 2000s then, around the dentistry contract. And the problem with dentistry is that when you are squeezing the money out of the NHS, as has been happening for 13 years, obviously when the pandemic hit, some money came in for the pandemic, but for the 10, 11 years before the pandemic, the NHS was not getting the traditional uplift in the spending that it's got throughout its history. When that is happening to the NHS, and when you're cutting different elements of the health budgets around the core NHS budget, it means that in the way in which NHS services are delivered is that dentistry, again, got pushed to the back. It was considered a Cinderella service and has not had the investment it needs. So
but according to the British Dental Association, the contract that came in under Tony Blair, and it's such a long time ago, it's extraordinary we're talking about it, but that contract is more or less the same now as it was then.
Yeah,
but that is a key part of the problem.
But there's an issue around the overall funding in the NHS.
Sure, but they are saying that is a key part of the problem because before 2006, dentists were paid for every piece of work they did, and then when this new contract came in, you might be aware of this, I'm not sure, they were paid a block contract. They were paid a fee to perform a certain number of units of activity, and if they did more than that, they didn't get paid. And so partly as a result of that, they weren't taking on new patients.
Yeah, and there's a
so presumably you would concede that was a mistake, that contract?
Well, not necessarily, because that would have been the appropriate contract for the time. But the question is, why has it not been revisited? Well, if you said it was 2006, why has it not been revisited then in the last 13, 14, 15 years?
So why is that mistake not being put right?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, that's a question for the government. But you've got to remember, this is in an overall NHS budget which has been squeezed for 10, 12 years, and for other health-associated budgets, public health budgets, social care budgets, have been cut back. And the consequence of all of that is that there are 100,000 vacancies across the whole of the NHS, and today we've got the figures showing 7.5 million people waiting for an operation.
Now, in the number of questions we had about dentistry, there was one from Salve Marziano, Which is that you over there with that lovely Italian name, Salvatore, presumably? And you were talking about your experience here in this area about dentistry. Just tell us a bit about what happened to you.
Yeah, well, me and my wife were foster carers for 23 years in Warwickshire, and during that time we had to register a lot of young children into dentists, NHS dentists, and not really had any problems. We moved to Unstanton about 4 or 5 months ago. The nearest dentist to us that's taken on NHS patients is 50 miles away.
50 miles?
50, yeah, at Spalding.
So you presumably rung around a lot of dentists, and that's,
we just simply can't find one. There's one round the corner which takes on private dentists, but we've got 4 young children, school children, and it's not financially viable. So it's obviously a regional issue as well.
Lee? Why is someone like Salvatore in this position?
Yeah, it's a thing we've got to get on top of. And I know my colleagues in the health department...
you have had 13 years to get on top of it.
For quite a lot of the last 13 years, it has worked to some extent. As you were just indicating, when you were where you were living previously, it was working OK. But it's absolutely the case. It's not working in certain places. I know my colleague Neil O'Brien in the health department is looking at this. Maria Caulfield is also Minister there. She's also been talking about potential changes to the contract, looking at how we can open up more access to NHS patients in dentistry, and I know that's absolutely important. But just to broaden it, because Jonathan quite rightly talked about money and funding, and ultimately everything comes down to questions about choices, and as Ayesha talked about, and trade-offs. And what the government has tried to do over the past 13 years, it started in a very difficult position where we were significantly overspending as a country. We managed to get that down quite considerably, and then these shocks came along, which we've had to spend a significant amount of money on that. Health service spending has significantly increased since 2010. It's gone up from about 120-something billion to about 175
I mean, funding
billion.
for NHS dental services has decreased 4% in real terms since 2014-15.
But my whole point is, in overall terms, there's been a significant amount of additional money going into health.
But not
into
dentistry.
And then what you have to do is work out how best to apportion that, because the government is the art of infinite and very important demands to very finite resources, and it's about trying to work out how you put that jigsaw together so that you can both support as much dentistry as you can, as well as all of the other things we're talking about.
So do people like Salvatore therefore just have to put up?
No, of course not. And we are working on trying to improve that. We're working on trying to get more NHS dentists open and taking patients and the like. But it's going to take time. And it does always come back to that reality that we have to work out with the money that we have, how we spend it as effectively as we can across a wide range of things that we need to do.
Woman here.
Hello. What trade-off would you equate to a child with toothache?
Well, I'd hope that they could be able to get the support that they needed in order to solve the toothache. But I also need to make sure that the people who need cancer treatment get that cancer treatment. I also need to make sure that there's enough money for the schools, or in my portfolio, I have to make sure there's enough money to remediate buildings that needed to be remediated after the Grenfell tragedy. And that's the job of government, to accept that you are absolutely right. I don't want any child to have toothache and not be able to have a service, not to be able to have support, not to be able to get that resolved. But at the same time, government, we have to be honest with you, we have to be open and transparent with you, that there is so many different things that need to be done. And that's what the Prime Minister's trying to do. He's saying, we've got some issues, let's try and resolve them, let's try and work through them and demonstrate to you that we're making progress as a country.
Woman back there in the black and white top, I think you're right, yes.
Yeah, hello. I'm a dental therapist.
Right, let's hear from you. Excellent.
I'm currently working in Norfolk, and I think we need to remember that dental disease is preventable. You know, we're talking about preventable diseases, and we don't seem to hear a lot of education. In places of Scotland and Wales, there are actually programmes where there's supervised toothbrushing, fluoride application, and we haven't got one of those in England, and that's a constant worry. And I wish there was a service, a programme for England that would certainly help the children. We're currently, there's a national survey currently going on for children who are in Year 6, who are 10 and 11 years old, and that goes off to the Department of Health and Disparities to find where the areas of decay are across England, and this is a sort of a survey that goes on every year and picks out different age demographics, but we don't seem to then follow it up with the actual programme of the supervised toothbrushing and things like fluoride application. And there's been a lot of talk with the government as well as fluoride in the water, and that's a big, health benefit that could benefit so many vulnerable children. Okay. And I just really wish, they would push on with this.
Okay, and the woman behind you there with the glasses, yes.
When I was at primary school, and I didn't go to a fancy primary school, we had the dentist come to the school once a year who checked the teeth of every single child in the school. So every child was getting their teeth checked. So those preventable things, which the lady in front has just mentioned, could obviously be picked up on and fixed relatively quickly. That seems like quite a cost-effective way of checking a lot of teeth in quite a short space of time.
Yeah. And the woman there in the dark top. Yes.
Is it not really about funding to get the training in the beginning? Because just it's the same with all NHS professions. There's not enough funding going into the training to get the more dentists in. Our population's growing, but the amount of dentists is not growing with it.
So in 2021, 2022, there are 43 dentists per 100,000 population. That's generally in the UK. In Norfolk, out of interest, there were just 38. Germany has over 80. Ayesha.
Well, I think the situation with dentistry is just an extended symptom of what we're seeing in the NHS across many different disciplines within the NHS. I mean, the reality is it's a real postcode lottery now in terms of your access to NHS dentistry. There are parts of this country which are sort of like dental deserts, if you like. There was some recent work done by the Liberal Democrats which showed in some parts of England there's up to 3,000 people per NHS dentist, and just 1/3 of adults have managed to see an NHS dentist in the last 2 years. So, of course, many people are having to turn to private dentists, and that's really expensive. And when there's a cost of living crisis right now, many people are not putting their dental care first. And in fact, I think there was a recent survey that said that around 20% of people had a go at DIY dentistry and removing a tooth by themselves. I mean, you just don't even want to
Anyone
think...
done that here? Just checking. Okay.
So we need a proper plan for dental services. But as the lady at the back was saying, it's the sort of same solutions that does need to be applied to the rest of the NHS. You need sustainable funding, and politicians have to be honest with us, the public, which we might need to pay some more in national insurance to get that funding. We've got to sort out these staff shortages as well. There are shortages of dentists, just as there are shortages of nurses. So there needs to be a proper workforce plan. That needs to be sustained as well. Prevention is incredibly important. And just like in health, you know, a big conversation that if there is an incoming Labour government is going to have is a bit of a social contract with the public as well, saying, look, we can give you this much, but you're going to have to play your part with health prevention, and that applies to dental provision. But I think there's a bigger question, and it's the same with dentistry and it's the same with the NHS. It's about joining up the dots between all these problems, and instead of putting sticking plasters on them right at the last minute, it's joining these things up. Health, so much of health is connected to things like poverty, it's connected to housing. All of these things need to be joined up, and it needs a joined up approach from government as well.
Sumption.
I don't know enough about the facts to contribute to this discussion, but I'm fascinated by what other people have got to say.
Oh, what? Now, we don't get enough of that on this one, may I say. That is so refreshing. Good for you. Let me tell you about next week. Next week, we're in Deeside on the Welsh-English border. We will be live from the Iceland Food Depot. It's a bit different, isn't it? And then the week after, as I told you, will be our Brexit Leave, especially in Clacton in Essex. If you want to be on either show, Deeside or Clacton, go to our Question Time website and you can follow the instructions there. OK, let's hear now from Nancy. Nancy Rothery. Ah, there you are.
My question is this. What is the purpose of the COVID inquiry? Will it result in anything substantial or be a waste of time?
Right. Now, Lord Sumption, I think you will have something to say about this. So, the COVID inquiry being run by, no doubt, a woman you know, Baroness Hallett, will it be insubstantial or a waste of time?
I think it's too early to say whether it'll be a waste of time. It's clearly going to take a very long time. We make the same mistake with almost every inquiry, major inquiry that we have in this country, we fail to work out what the main purpose of this is. The COVID inquiry is a classic example. There seem to be two main purposes. One is to offer solace to victims or people who see themselves as victims of either the government's countermeasures or the pandemic itself. The other is to learn lessons for another pandemic. Now, it seems to me that the second of those things is enormously more important than the first. And if you are going to have an inquiry which has as one of its key purposes the solace to victims, you immediately make it confrontational, you involve large numbers of lawyers, the whole thing, everybody has to have their say, and it takes a very long time, and by the time the report comes out, it's probably out of date anyway.
And what makes you think that is one of the key purposes? Because the way it's described is to examine the UK's response to and the impact of the pandemic and learn lessons for the future. Well,
what makes me think that is the arrangements that have already been made for the participation of large numbers of victim groups and some of the comments that Lady Hallett has made publicly. Now, I think we can learn a lesson in many aspects of this whole problem from Sweden, but one thing that we can
because they finished theirs already.
Exactly. They appointed a commission presided over by a neutral figure, quite a large commission with social services, medical services and so on, all represented. They were appointed at the beginning of 2020, early in 2021. They have produced 2 interim reports and a final report. The final report appeared in March 2022. It's 1,700 pages long. It's an extremely impressive document. The great advantage that they had is that they weren't obliged to sit hearing lawyers and witnesses for months on end, each with their own specific complaint. They did something which was therefore a great deal more useful to the public of Sweden, and I suggest to those who read it, to the public of every other country with the same problem.
Jonathan.
I don't personally have an objection to the inquiry, listening to the views of those who are related to people who sadly lost their lives in the COVID pandemic, or others who feel they were impacted in particular ways. I do think the inquiry needs to command public support and trust. So I don't feel as strongly on that point as Lord Sumption does, although I entirely understand the point about the need for the inquiry to move at some reasonable pace and not get bogged down. I certainly accept that point, because the most fundamental thing that must come out of this inquiry is that lessons are learned, so that should we ever be hit in the future by an infectious disease which spreads with speed, that we know what to do and we know what not to do.
And do you feel confident lessons will be learned? Because looking at inquiries in the past, there's a sort of reasonably patchy history of recommendations being made and then being taken up or not taken up by government.
I feel the inquiry, to me, and the leadership of the inquiry, it looks to me like it does want to be rigorous, that it does want to leave no stone unturned. It's why I strongly believe that the government should not be fighting this attempt to get all the different WhatsApp messages and all the diaries and so on. The inquiry does need to see everything, because we need to understand the decisions that were going on. We need to understand why, for example, in the January-February time, the Prime Minister wasn't going to the Cobra committees. We need to understand. I think we probably have a different view on some of the restrictions that were put in place, but we need to understand what exactly was going on behind closed doors and in these WhatsApp discussions about whether to go further on certain restrictions, why my city, Leicester, was kept in a longer set of restrictions than the rest of the country. We need to understand why our care homes did not have the protective ring thrown around them that we were promised by Matt Hancock and Boris Johnson at press conferences. We need to understand the decisions that were going on and all the discussions that were going on in government. So the government should hand everything over to this inquiry and not be fighting it in the courts.
OK. Yes, in the pale blue suit there, yes.
Hello. Does the COVID inquiry raise significant issues around the amount of power that government has in its hands, especially with not handing over the redacted WhatsApp messages of Boris Johnson and the Cabinet Office choosing not to do that? Does it raise significant issues around the amount of power the government holds, and does that fail the idea of holding the government to account and scrutinising the actions of the government?
I mean, the government's happy to hand over redacted messages. It's the unredacted they're unhappy about. Last week, we had the Science Minister, George Freeman, on the programme saying he thought the government was probably going to lose this judicial review over the WhatsApp messages. Do you agree?
I think it's a valid thing for the government to do. I mean,
do you also think they're probably going to lose this judicial review?
I'll let the legal processes continue, but I think there is an important legal point that needs to be argued. It's a very narrow legal point. But to your point about do we think that the government has too much power, the mere fact that we're going through this process, that we've set up an inquiry with a broad terms of reference, and the head of the inquiry has said, I want X, and we're in a genuine disagreement about how broad that should be, and we're going to court to talk about that, demonstrates that the government doesn't have the kind of broad power, I think, that we're having to justify ourselves, and we want to do that because this is a very narrow legal point. I'm not a lawyer. You know, we have handed over, I think, 55,000 documents already as a government. The very narrow legal discussion here is about whether communications and interactions that are absolutely irrelevant to the COVID inquiry, whether they should be handed out to COVID.
You know that what the chair of the inquiry is saying, Baroness Hallett, is it's up to her to decide what is relevant and what is not.
And that's what's going to be litigated in the courts quickly, as I understand, later this month and next month. And I think that's entirely right that the court should take a view on that. But it's also, I think, relevant for us all as citizens and then for some of us as parliamentarians to take a view that both it is important to get to the heart of what happened here for all of the reasons that many people have talked about here and outside of the room, but also say, things that just aren't anything to do with COVID, is that actually something the COVID inquiry needs to look at?
Lots of hands have suddenly shot up. Let me go around some of these. It's the man at the very back in the blue shirt.
I think we're missing the point slightly. We should be focusing more on what went wrong, not who said what to who, or where was so-and-so when this was happening. We should be focusing on what went wrong, what went right, and how we could improve on the performance to support the health service and everyone else who worked through the pandemic, so we get a better outcome next time if it is ever to come around again.
OK, and the man further forward in the pink shirt. Yes.
Is it because you're just trying to kick things into the long grass? By just kicking it forward, we never get a result.
Is this the government you're talking
to? Yes, it is.
But why would we have handed over 55,000 documents already if we're trying to push it
it's an
into
irrelevance, isn't it? It's you
sense.
demonstrating to the public that you're with the public, that you're helping them, and by kicking it into the long grass, you're not.
Well, we set it up. We gave it a broad terms of reference. We've given 55,000 documents to them. I don't think that really washes. We're having a very narrow discussion about a very legalistic point, which will be resolved in the next, I think, 4 to 6 weeks.
That's nonsense.
But ultimately,
it's
been set up, and it's broad, and there's lots gone there already.
It's a nonsense. You set something up, and then you find reasons not to see it through.
So why hand over 55,000 documents already if that was...
That is a nonsense, isn't it? It's a nonsense for what you want to show to the public.
Well, it's what we've done.
Absolutely.
Lee, Nancy, sorry, you're Lee. Nancy, you asked this question. What do you think of what you're hearing?
I think surely the thing is expediency with this, and I agree with in terms of there's got to be some speed allocated. If Sweden can manage it, I know they're a much smaller country, but if they can manage it, and what is the point, the time that you spend taking things out of WhatsApp messages to hand them over, just hand everything over. If you want to have something open, and the fact that you can claim that there's 55,000, that's a lovely number, but I think most of us who are heavy users of WhatsApp will have quite a large number of messages that we send back and forth to each other. So that number, to a degree, that's quite irrelevant. The thing is, you want to have some sort of honesty and openness, and if you want people to understand, I think it's very, very right that the outcome should be that you depoliticise it. You have to say what's gone right, what's gone wrong, and put the country in a state where something like this happens again. We can move with some speed, and surely that's going to be the point, the whole point, a successful report coming out. Okay. And I don't think it's helpful I don't think it's working with the people of the country to keep some things back because somebody thinks it's not relevant when you have somebody that's actually elected to take control of it. Surely it should be their decision on that, not yours.
Ayesha.
I think it's right that we're having the inquiry. I think the government was correct to set it up. I think it's frankly ludicrous that the government is now taking to court its own inquiry that it set up. And it doesn't matter if you give over 1 million messages. If you can give as many messages if you want. It's what the chair and the inquiry needs to see. That's the critical thing. But I think this inquiry's got to do a number of things. I think that we can all get into the sort of weeds of who said what when with the WhatsApp messages. We've got to try and sort of rise above the kind of tittle-tattle of, you know, who's up and who's down and the embarrassing Boris Johnson and Matt Hancock WhatsApp messages. We've got to learn the lessons of this. We've got to understand, for example, why were we so slow to get into lockdown? Because I think, why did we have those Cheltenham and the sporting event? Because I think they ended up prolonging the lockdown in the long term. I think we've also got to learn about the cost of the lockdown because they were not cost-free. There's a big financial price that we're paying now. There's a big cost to people's health, their mental health, children's education as well. So we've got to balance up all of that. I also think the other thing, that the point that the gentleman at the back made, this inquiry is worth nothing if we do not learn. We spent a lot of time talking about the health service and you know, broken public services. The readout of this inquiry has got to help us build resilience in our public services, particularly the health service. It's also got to make us look at the health of our own country. Final thing, which I think is really important, we also have to learn what happened with those PPE contracts as well, because that is a big part of this story. Why did so much money go out to people who clearly didn't have a Scooby how to make PPE?
So, Lord Sumption, you here as a former Supreme Court judge. Can I just ask your opinion on what Lee is describing as a very narrow point of law and the handing over of these particular bits of information to the chair of this inquiry? Do you think the government should hand them over?
Government's position is completely indefensible. They've got 2 points. One is that ministers should be entitled to have private conversations in the course of forming judgments about policy. The other is that it should be for them, rather than Lady Hallett, to determine relevance. The problem about the privacy argument is that privacy goes out the window when you appoint a statutory inquiry to discover the facts. And the terms of reference include reporting on how the decisions were made. So clearly they are relevant. As to the second point, that it's for them to decide what's relevant, I'm afraid that simply won't wash in the light of the statutory powers, which expressly provide that the chairman of the inquiry is to make the decision and that she has to form a view about the public interest. If she forms the view that it's in the public interest for these documents to be disclosed to her, and she obviously has formed that view, then no court on earth is going to quash the government's decision. So George Freeman was absolutely right to say the government was likely to lose this. Why are they spending public money on litigation which they know that they're likely to lose?
20 seconds left. Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I can only repeat. We're going through the court process. I mean,
but at this point, why wasting public money on it?
Because if you take an example of what in some of these messages, potentially in some of these messages, it is people talking about their own private lives, people talking about their own medical conditions. We've got to remember that there's a whole heap of things here, and it's about the fact, is this relevant or not relevant? And we're saying, if it's relevant, absolutely. If it's not, why does it need to go there?
Well, I shall let Lord Sumption, you disagree entirely about that. We're out of time. That is it for this week. Remember, we are available as a podcast on BBC Sounds after this programme. I look forward to reports of the drink between the three of you. Remember our Brexit programme, June the 22nd on Thursday, and we will see you next week in D-Side from Question Time here in King's Lynn. Bye-bye.